So folks, welcome. Many of you, the first encounter at the book festival of the year. We're so happy to have you here. You're here for the landscape of family. You've got an awesome group of readers in front of you. I heard some of them read before. Yeah, just a great way to kick off the festival. We have today Sophia Shalmiyer. And Sophia emigrated from Leningrad to America in 1990. She's a feminist writer and painter living in Portland with her two children. And her work has appeared in many places, including Lit Hub, Guernica, Electric, Lit, Vila, Portland Review, among others. And Mother Winter, her book, is one that we have for sale today, and it's her first book. All right, and we have Dean Kuipers, a former environmental writer and editor for the Los Angeles Times, and he is the author of Burning Rainbow Farm, which won the Michigan Notable Book Award, and Operation Bite Back. His work has appeared in The Atlantic, Outside Magazine, Rolling Stone, Men's Journal, and Playboy. And most recently, he is the author of The Deer Camp, a memoir of father, a family, and the land that healed them. And then rounding out our panel is David Axelrod, who is the editor of Basalt, a journal of fine and literary arts, and Sensational Nightingales, the collected poetry of Walter Pavlich, which is published by Lynx House Press. And his new collection of poems, The Open Hand, is from Lost Horse Press. That was in the autumn of 2017, and has another collection of nonfiction, Accretions of Absence, and that's forthcoming spring of 2019. Is that out now?
The title is now The Eclipse I Call Father. They didn't think anybody would buy a book called Accretions of Absence. They're probably right. That's an old one. I should have read it more closely.
Well, awesome. David's work has also appeared in About Place, Cloud Bank, Crazy Horse, Fog Clarity, The Hopper, Hubbub, The Singing Bull, and Terrain, among others. So please give a warm welcome to our readers today. They're going to read a little bit, and then discuss a little bit, and then take some questions from you folks. So welcome. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We should just go in the order that you read the thing. So that
Otherwise, it'll be confusing.
It'll be confusing, right? Then you have to be Sophia. What's that for you? Hi, how are you? Thank you for being here for the first of many incredible events, and thank you for everybody who put this festival on. I know it takes a village. It's hard work. So I'm going to read from Mother Winter, and in terms of landscape of the family, the book is written about my loss of my mother back in the Soviet Union and dealing with this inconsolable loss of then coming to America as a 12-year-old, going through Vienna and in Italy as a Jewish refugee. I don't know if you guys kind of remembered this, but back in the Reagan, first Bush era, they were hell-bent on getting the Jews out, and that became like this huge phenomenon. In Portland, we have the Oregon Jewish History Museum, and they did like a whole like Soviet Jewry exhibit. And it's so funny because on my side, where we were, even though, I mean, anti-Semitism is huge here too, but like we didn't really feel like we needed the Americans to get us out, but it was a nice excuse to come to capitalism, I suppose. But anyways, my mother was an alcoholic, and my dad kind of ended up stealing me away from her, and I have not seen her since. Spoiler alert if you buy the book. But in terms of a sense of place, I'm just gonna skip around and read just a little bit about what it was like to be in this family in the Soviet Union. Your ex-husband was a hypnotic father, an actual hypnotist by the time he finished school and became a psychotherapist. He took me to work at his clinic sometimes, and I sat on in his sciences, where he rocked back and forth, putting a spell on men with numb left arms, chest pains, phobias, disorders of the nervous system. I snuck out and walked the halls lined with glass case displays of glistening bread and wreaths of wheat, symbols of our storied Russian labor force. I would peek into all of the different treatment rooms: paraffin dips, iodine rubs, mineral water cures, acupuncture needles attached to electric wires. If she wasn't busy, I would say hello to the speech therapist I often visited for my impediment, mispronouncing the letter L. The chalkboard in our sessions was dominated by the Cyrillic L, shaped like a house. Looks like this. So essential to enunciating your name, Elena, or the word for love, Lublu. The Russian L looks like an American A without a belt. The Russian L is an empty American A without containment. No mother, no home. The daughter can't utter her name without swallowing the letter like tepid pureed soup. The speech therapist asking, please touch your teeth. Do you hear yourself? You make it sound like a V. But the phantom mother and the tongue-tied daughter share a mute V. An upside-down Russian L, the shape of their sex. The American cunt of her future. Victory. Freedom without freedom. It was too risky to ask for her and be denied, so I didn't say her name much. Mother loosened my tongue. I was scared of us being seen together, scared to sit next to her and be aligned with an outcast. Most of all, I didn't want to betray my father's girlfriend who judged Elena without pity, a generous scarcity of mercy. My mother must have felt humiliated. She must have given up on herself completely. She must have retreated and relapsed even harder. How small she looked sitting on that couch, reaching out for my hand. When my mother was allowed to visit, I swatted her away as she shrank into her seat. I stared toward the door, tortured her with prolonged silence. I worried that if I sat on her lap, if I hugged her, if I sided with her in front of my dad and future stepmom, I would fall through a dank well in her chest and she would leave again. I would be banished to live in her chest like a traitor, an outsider, nomadic roadkill. A return check, null and void, a 0 would be my number, I would be vanished. It's hard to organize our days together in my congealed 80s Soviet Union mind. The casualness of violence, the nearness of peril or harm like a dull click of an abacus. The decade is a bronze disease patina, the green paste on a doorbell that rings when you show up and you do not show up very often. When you do appear, the flipbook banalities marry the destruction in a figure 8 of a skater tracing the ice in reverse at reckless speed. You sit in a bath facing me, not yet in your 30s. Your breasts used to be my breasts, belonged to me, would get too full and ache without me. Later, much later, when they have fed 2 mouths that have rarely spoken your name, mine look like what I once inhaled of a wandering mother, your dark blue veins, wet worms, and cracked white tile. Like you, my body would become a lopsided provider, the muteness of the right breast forcing the left side to overfunction, to nearly explode with nurturing, with twice the volume, a drought and drowned chest. You tell me about your see-through skin, your thin skinness. Have you seen the paintings of noble ladies in the Hermitage? You wonder aloud. If I look closely, their corseted, plump, and powdered bosoms have the same trolley rail lines that refuse to hide beneath the first light of coating of Leningrad snow as your chest does. My father took me to museums, ballets, and operas almost every weekend, so you were asking a concrete, pointed question. Even though your family had lived in the most culturally rich city in Russia for generations, you never went to the Hermitage with your daughter. Too much of a townie to act like a tourist on your native soil. You stand up, a floating iceberg in the fog, followed by your little girl's steam, and begin to dry off. Our ancestors come from good stock, you remind me. She was a drunk liar. My breasts will surely turn out fine and delicate like yours. My blood will suck up the lost riches and formal tea times you imagine your ghost once had and make a map on my body as well, unable to hide our true blue ties. We're in the 4x4 pea soup green room with a toilet and torn up newspapers at your feet that we wipe ourselves with when the tissue paper runs out. The smudged traces of the truth in the news. Our paper was called Pravda, which meant truth. The smearing, the tainting of the facts, flushed evidence. It's my turn to go, and you hoist me up onto the cold porcelain and read from the scraps you move around with your big toe, smoking a cigarette. I'm constipated, and you give me a puff of your smoke because it always helps you go. This trick works. I cough and open up and feel relief. All of my holes feel different after this. I'm gonna stop there.
Does that trick really work for smoking? I didn't know that.
Yeah, smoking is diuretic.
I did not know that. as a non-smoker, I should look into that.
I won't ask why.
Yeah, we'll leave that for another time. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's take a little bit of setup. My book, The Deer Camp, is quite literally about a deer camp, a place that my dad bought as a way to get back together with us, his 3 sons. But he was a very problematic guy and a cheater, and ruined his life with my mother by having many, many girlfriends. But the place where he was good was outdoors in the woods, hunting and fishing, and so he thought buying a deer hunting camp would be the perfect place for all of us to sort of rekindle our relationships. And I'm going to read a little section that's about the first time I went to his deer camp, which we resisted for years and years because we didn't really want to be reunited with him quite the way he wanted. The setup is that our problems at home drove me into books. I was a very bookish kid and very into reading. And my brother Brett, who's the middle child, became hunter, fisher, woodsman, craftsman, builder of things. And my brother Joe became a drunk. And he's the youngest. So he's in rehab. And luckily today, he's totally okay. But he went to rehab, and on a 2-day pass from the rehab, we actually went to the deer camp for the first time. So that's what I'm going to read here. We all ducked into the cabin. My dad built a cabin on the place. We all ducked into the cabin for a drink of water, and I saw Dad's shoulders up around his ears with tension, and I thought, oh no, he's going to have a talk with us. It was such a rare event, I didn't know whether to be scared or curious, but I was 26 years old. Even if he said something outrageous, I could just walk away from it. What did he want to talk about? Drugs and drinking? About what happened between him and Mom, finally? Maybe he met someone new? He kept his girlfriend secret the whole time they were married, so if he did have a serious romance, maybe it was hard for him to talk about. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. My girlfriend Ann took one shot of me sitting at the kitchen table laughing with Joe and putting a good face on it. Joe was singing Jane's Addiction, standing in the shower thinking. And Dad didn't know why we were laughing. It was because we both know he was about to ruin everything. And the water is so piping hot, sang Joe. I thought it was in the water is so fucking hot, I said. That's because you have a filthy mind, Joe said. Filth! Well, I just wanted to let you know, my dad broke in, that this isn't going to be like old Bernie Card's place. When we were kids, we went deer hunting with this guy named Bernie Card, who had what you would think of as the classic cabin where people shot deer and drank whiskey and made big fires and told jokes. I loved Bernie's cabin, I said. It's great there. Well, he's a generous man and he really likes you, but there was a lot that went on there that I just didn't appreciate. I could see this had been bugging him for years. His jaw was tightened around a kind of half smile, probably for Ann's benefit. Bernie drank whiskey and his guests told dirty jokes, and once in a while he had a wild guest who might shoot extra deer or stay up all night drinking and bounce a car through the woods. Bernard's sons and daughters-in-law were very serious hunters, but 1 or 2 others were what Dad called slob hunters. Slob hunters were people who poached or drank or thought it was funny to use a military weapon for hunting, or who killed for sport or left wounded animals in the woods. The idea that someone might mess up his hunting make it somehow unethical made Dad visibly anxious. When we stayed with Mr. Card in his log cabin, Dad would wash dishes after dinner as everyone prepared to drink and play euchre, which is a card game, and then he'd go straight to bed as a kind of protest. I'd play cards and eventually fall asleep on the floor in front of the big fireplace. I shouldn't have taken you boys up there, and I apologize for it. I wouldn't do that today. I don't think that was sending the right message. I'm not sorry, I said. You taught me how to watch the woods at that place. That was really important to me. We're just not going to have that atmosphere, Dad said. We're not going to have anybody up here except family. I thought of a line from an old church song, and we know all of them. Like a bird from prison bars has flown, I'll fly away. I was already halfway out the door. Bruce had created another place to separate himself from the dirty old world. Up here at the Kuipers Hunt Club, we weren't going to talk about any shitty divorce or anybody slashing their arms with broken glass. No way. If that stuff had to happen, it didn't happen here. This place was about the communion of saints. Dad then grimly spat out the rules that he and the uncles had made to keep the place pure, so nobody would, quote, booger it up. No going out into the woods when there wasn't hunting season. No wandering the place or camping out on it or putting in sit spots that were unapproved, not even over on the USA, which is the federal land. No bushwhacking off the trails, no tearing around with motocross motorcycles, which Brett had, or snowshoes, or skis. No hunting with dogs at all, because everybody knows dogs run deer. No drinking, no smoking, no bonfires, no visits without one of the 3 uncles present, no guests, and above all, no dirty boots in the cabin, no bringing the outside in. That way it can be for the whole family, Dad said proudly. He looked at Joe. Sounds about right, Joe lied and sang, the water is so piping hot. Joe looked out the window. Dad clearly believed this place had something to do with keeping Joe alive, but from the look on my brother's soft and puffy face, I thought that was unlikely. How do you feel, Joe? Said Ann, looking at his faraway eyes. I like all them people just fine, he said, answering a different question. We can fish the Pere Marquette and the Baldwin from here too, I said. It's so close. Well, it's not a hotel, Dad said. What do you mean? Pretty soon everybody be staying here to go fishing or canoeing or whatever. We didn't build it for that. It's for hunting this property. Dad made being in the woods sound like a cruel psychology experiment. Short hours on the land while hunting, and then long hours shut indoors with shitloads of people. 14 or 15 uncles, aunts, and cousins were expected in the fall, and our cousins hadn't even started having babies yet. It was like being rolled up in a piece of carpet with just a circle of light showing at the end. The place had the potential to be so beautiful, but there was no way we could hang there. We're gonna fill these woods with hot lead, Joe suddenly joked, perking up. I knew from the way he said it, he'd just come to a decision. They'd be lucky if he stayed here even one night. Where would he go in the middle of the night if he couldn't sleep? Where would he walk? Where would he smoke? How could you watch the night if you got in trouble for even opening the curtains? The hunting is gonna be awesome here, I said, backing him up. Dad jumped on our comments, taking them for enthusiasm. Oh, you guys should come in the fall when all your cousins are here. We really have so much fun. Joe and I went out on the sand, stood looking up at the tall red pines along the cabin. Joe lit a cigarette. Dad put his head out the slider. Joe, we really don't want smoking up here because the deer can smell it, he said, hanging in the doorway. Dad, I'm going to smoke this cigarette, Joe said without pulling his gaze out of the trees. He wasn't angry. The clouds formed question marks in the sky. The world was vast and had its own agenda. Dad withdrew and closed the slider after him. It's like prison with Camo, I said. On the other hand, that's the most Dad's talked to me in at least 10 years, Joe said.
I'm not going to talk about my family, or at least I will do so only obliquely. I'm going to read a passage from a piece called A Note Left on a Mountain, which visits with 3 people who haven't lived the life they imagined they would live and are trying at the ends of their lives to live those lives with very mixed results. After a close call with my own death in my mid-30s, I met Richard McFarlane, who lived alone without phone or electricity far down the Imnaha River. I had earlier expressed to a friend my desire to meet people who abandon the lives they created to return to the lost landscapes of childhoods. A friend of my friend supplied Richard's address in that remote canyon. It's a striking landscape, the one he was hoping to reclaim. Canyon walls of ochre-colored columnar basalt are interspersed with broad grassy benches that rise thousands of feet above the canyon floor, where a primitive road winds above the river. From that rough road, the broad western sky narrows to a channel of blue mirroring the river below. Depending on the season, the road is either rutted, muddy, or dusty as it divides into various trails leading to backcountry ranches and camps. Having never traveled into the area, I arranged through a series of letters over several months to meet Richard at the mouth of Lightning Creek. At the appointed time, he stood waiting, leaning against his flatbed truck and contemplatively smoking a pipe of tobacco. When he saw me in the twilight, he leaned forward and shoved his tall, thin frame away from the front fender of his truck. He gestured to follow along the dirt track that led through the galleries of cottonwoods along Lightning Creek. The wide metal edge of the flatbed that served as a bumper was plastered with stickers of decidedly liberal causes, everything from gay rights to paid maternity leave, an unusual iconoclastic set of political beliefs for that isolated area of Northeast Oregon. According to the USGS map I consulted earlier, the trail to his cabin wound 5 miles, crossing several fords that I soon discovered required a degree of heroics on the part of my little truck, over whose hood the current washed. The river cobbles slipped away beneath the tires, and I thought for sure that the truck would founder, the headlights glowing vaguely under green water. Meanwhile, lightning flashed overhead and thunder exploded with such concussive force it gave substance to the air, its echo repeating for miles. In the silence before the next strike came the sound of rocks skating down basalt cliffs in the nearby dark. I pitched my tent far from the canyon walls across the meadow near the creek and joined Richard on the porch of the cabin, where we shared a flask as the rain poured, then abruptly stopped, leaving just the sound of water dripping from leaves and ambient sound, or ambient song of the creek. When I asked, Richard said his return to the landscape of childhood 70 years ago was prompted by worrisome little messages, warnings. I didn't know what he meant. Sometimes we get a little too serious for our own good, he said. What you discover when you return to your place of origin, he said, if there is anything such as an intact place to return to, you figure out pretty quickly that, and here he trailed off without finishing his thought. The singular fact about Lightning Creek is that there are no people. There's little evidence of occupation besides sporadic arrivals and departures, cattle drives in spring and fall, a few wanderers appearing on 3-day holiday weekends in summer, fewer and fewer hunters as the season turns toward winter and the country above shuts down. The intimacies of Richard's childhood, all that seemed permanent then, the open-endedness of time, his parents and their friends following herds and harvests, appeared scarce now, 70 years on. What we imagine we will find, we fail to find, but that isn't the same as saying it does not exist. In his poem Basho, the Dutch writer Kees Nutenboom observed once that what vanishes is still there as something that vanished. And that was largely borne out by Richard's experience. The next morning, under strikingly calm, clear skies, he and I stood in the glistening meadow beside Lightning Creek. We lit a fire in a ring of stones and boiled water for tea. Following his service in the Navy during the Korean War, Richard finished college, then lived aimlessly until during the Kennedy administration, he joined the Peace Corps. After several years in Africa, he pursued a career of vagueness that seemed intended as a judgment of the pursuit. He retired at the first opportunity, and then, his blood cells presenting some abnormalities, he hired on as a ranch hand in Lightning Creek, where his own parents had worked as hired hands when they were young. He was born nearby in 1926. He told me that he would probably die in the cabin behind us. The Imnaha Canyon is one of those few places that remains more or less as it was a lifetime ago. The paved road, electricity, and phone didn't arrive anywhere in the canyon until well into the second half of the 20th century and had not yet arrived at Richard's cabin. That canyon was among the last places in the contiguous United States to enter the modern era as we commonly think of it, the age of displacement, rootlessness, and loss. As such, there is still a recognizable place to return to there, a past scene, albeit through a liminal scrim. Over black tea, Richard asked if I had noticed the tall ponderosa on the hillside at the canyon's mouth. It's the tree Chief Joseph used to orient his retreat from General Howard's army. They began their war here. That tree marked the way across a low point in the ridge to Dugbar. That's where he got his people across the river, holding onto the manes of their horses as they swam. I imagine it was a somber crossing. They were leaving this country and must have wondered if they would ever see it again. After a long pause, Richard looked up, a little surprised at his emotion. He laughed and pointed out that when Howard arrived, it took him 3 days to move his army across the same place in the river. I think that tree is really not the original, though everyone wishes it were. And it could be, I suppose. We sat in silence again for several more minutes while an azure bunting sang near the creek. Otherwise, the morning remained still. When he spoke again, he was still thinking about the Nez Perce retreat from eastern Oregon to Bear Paw, Montana. So much happened after Joseph crossed that river. A lot of it sorrowful. You can't discount any of it. I mean, it didn't happen during my life, and the Nez Perce moved on well before my own parents came into this canyon. But it's never really over. The same is true about the camp of Chinese miners above Dug Bar, murdered for gold. That one seems a little more connected to the world I grew up in. When I was a kid, I knew who the murderers were. I'd see them in the summer up at the Grange. But either way, what happened here doesn't go away, and no matter how isolated this place seems, it played its role. He went on to say that he had come to prefer the idea that the pine tree isn't the same tree because people are too often motivated by a longing to keep things the same. History inhabits us even if we pretend we don't bear its burden. In this canyon, that particular horizon is very narrow. The burden is always here, and that hasn't made it easy to come back. If the big tree at the mouth of the canyon was the tree Joseph used to orient his strategic retreat from the corrupt finale of Manifest Destiny, you might be able to more easily ignore the fact that Joseph's body is buried beside a littered highway in Washington state, far from his father's grave and his own Wallowa homeland. The tree's continued existence would seem a form of inviolate presence, the past persisting without the moral complications of his exile. Richard sipped from his cup, and I wasn't interested really in pointing any of this out. Joseph was born just over the ridge to the north. He wasn't as lucky as Richard. He and those who followed him from this canyon and across a series of battlefields in Idaho and Montana bore the real burden of history. We looked up at the gap on the rim of the canyon. His mother had gone to Enterprise months before Richard's birth. Soon after, his father on horseback carried him into the canyon in his arms, an infant passing into this life through that low point on the ridge. Spain saddle, he said. We came down bench after bench of deep grass into a side canyon of the Imnaha, forded the river, and then made our way back up here where everyone was waiting to greet me and my mother on her return. All those people who lived here then are gone. I'm the only one left now. A shadow crossed his face like a bird passing between him and the sun. He teared up and apologized. I don't think I can say any more about any of this now. I'm sorry. Coming back here at this point in my life has been a little overwhelming. The day-to-day here is very simple, but I don't feel that way. It's not as simple as a routine. He poked the fire and then stared at the canyon walls directly above where we stood. His dilemma was clear, and the waves of emotion he felt not so hopeful. I'm here and can see it, he said, referring to the community that occupied the canyon of his youth. And yet, I can see it's all gone, except inside of me. Simply re-inhabiting the canyon in no way guaranteed the past that was dear to him could reveal itself, much less endure beyond his life and into the lives and words of others. Thank you.
So we have absolutely no format.
We didn't realize we were intended to interview each other.
We can
Good
create,
Lord.
or yeah, it's what is it? Choose your own adventure. That's what the kids are doing these days. Yeah, we can pick on themes, and then maybe you guys have questions for us based on very little you know about our work. But just even listening to your guys' really, really beautiful readings and thinking about how, in any way possible, what I was reading is connected. And it seems like there's this thread of fathers trying to save themselves through, or just men trying to save themselves through like a place. Like, you know, like a place will save us, examining a place will save us. For my dad, it's like, I'm going to take you out, you know, to America, and that'll save us. But just this idea, and I remember my dad even telling me, like, everywhere you go, there you are. But then
The wisdom.
but then these men themselves would be like, yeah, like we need a hub, or like we need to examine this land, or we need to, you know, move through it this way in order to maybe manage like their own pain and sense of worthlessness, or their families breaking up, or this world breaking up. So it just seems like that's like a very common
Control
theme
chaos.
there.
Yeah.
Control chaos by moving themselves around
Yeah.
in land to find themselves, or save themselves or their family.
And when it is true that all three of us were reading about like fathers or men who are making this journey, but do you think that is exclusive to?
I don't. I just meant like
Right.
the three readings right now happen to be
Right.
about that.
Right.
So it's just really interesting for me.
That was certainly true in the case of the deer camp. My dad's, it was an overt gesture on his part to get this 95-acre chunk of swamp, which was beautiful. And, no, it was. We actually did love it because it was swamp, because that's where there was a lot of deer in there, and that's what it was for. But he you know, was hoping that would bring us back to him, and to sort of heal the family. And down the line, what really did heal it was when he stopped shooting deer and started growing them. We did some forestry on this piece of land, and took down a forest and grew a new forest, which is kind of standard procedure when you have aspen lands. It's good for the wildlife. And when that new forest came up, our dad completely changed. Like that, we had done a lot of work, and that came up, and he hugged us and kissed us. It was the total opposite of what I just read you. And said, you know, look what you guys have done to the land here. It's so beautiful. And we had the greatest dad ever for about 5 years. And unfortunately, he passed away after that 5 years. But it was fantastic to have that at the end of our life. So in a way, he was right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I got this place to save us, and it worked, which is doesn't happen all that often. Like, I don't know if you feel that way, like in your book, whether it worked, or the piece that you wrote, it sounded like
He's still alive. He's an old man now. And he moved to town and lives just outside of town and grows a garden. He seems like he's doing okay.
But he moved out of that canyon.
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. That's an impossible place to live. Yeah.
But he said that he would probably die in
He
that
did.
cabin.
He did. Yeah, he did. But he was overstating the case.
Yeah, yeah. I think just thinking about like my dad's motivation for leaving. You know, he's from Azerbaijan originally, and so he's brown-skinned, even though he's like in denial of this fact. People from that region consider themselves white for some interesting reason. And so for him, like living where we're living in Leningrad as this like brown Jewish man, he was not faring well, but he was in love with Leningrad, and he was in love with our culture, he was in love with the friendships and the art and everything that we had. So when we came to America, even though he was doing that to save us and himself and create opportunity and all of these like really cliched immigrant things, I think a part of him really did die, and I think a part of me really did die. But at the same time, there's like this no going back, because in this book I go back and I see that Russia is gross, it's scary, it's awful, and the way that it was scary or awful in the Soviet Union at least maintains some kind of soul or some kind of integrity, and that's no longer the case there at all. It's really just
Predatory.
Yeah, it's
On a
this
personal
oligarchy.
level.
Yeah, in every
Yeah.
single way. So it's just like it's a huge, huge loss for everybody, because America didn't quite. I mean, like I love America, but it didn't really pan out exactly how an immigrant thinks it's going to, and then you can't go back home because home is worse than it ever was. And so, like, I think there's a constant, like, in-betweenness for him in terms of a sense of place. And he actually called me yesterday. He was, like, boarding a plane for Europe. I think that's his dream. He wants to move to Spain.
So still looking
I think so.
a place to belong.
Yeah, I think, he came and visited me in Portland for the first time, and I moved to the Pacific Northwest in 1996, so like he just has been like, what is that stupid place over there on the, on the West Coast, and so provincial, but he came and he was just like, ugh, so underwhelming, He's just very,
Thanks, Dad.
he's expecting a lot of the world, and he keeps moving through it. He likes Monaco. I think it's just fairy tales.
How much do you think that has to do with having grown up in the Soviet Union and not having much access except to the outside, except as an imaginal space?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's not just him. I think that's like a immigrant experience that that I think happens for everybody. It's just this idea that you're going to be redeemed by a place, and then it turns out to be tragically flawed, and you have to like work your butt off, and people don't like you. But I think maybe
Other
the whole
than that, it's great.
I think the Soviet
Yeah,
Union
yeah.
thing may be true, because
Yeah,
maybe we
yeah.
did kind of have these fairy tale ideas about the West or Europe. Like he thought that he was going to be like a French poet someday or something like that. But I have my own ideas about the Soviet Union creating its own magic. I don't know. And in your books, it seems like your fathers also wanted to create like their own magic, right? Like these are like
Sure.
enchanted snow globes or something, right?
Sure.
I don't know if you guys want
Yeah.
to talk
With
about
rules, though.
With lots of
rules.
rules.
That
That snow had to
rules,
fall a very
yeah.
Maybe
particular
talk
way.
about the rules. I don't know. What are the rules?
Well, he laid them out, what the restrictions were,
Yes.
what
Yeah.
what you could affirm.
Yeah, no fires,
It
no
was
walking
mostly
around.
like a
Right,
thou
no
shalt
smoking.
not.
Right,
It was
yeah.
a pretty
Yeah.
familiar approach.
And when you wrote your book, are they sort of snapshots like
They're all
that guy?
discrete pieces,
Okay.
and on the theme of absence and trying to see as much of time in a moment see the depth of time in a place and in a moment as possible, and so that is the theme that is consistent across the essays. Some of them are lighter than others, but my editors wanted me to include some family stories. So, Lord, I gave them a bunch, and,
That was like something
but it
they
was all
anticipated?
traumatic and mostly bad news. but I didn't.
But it
do
was
that.
something you had
Yeah.
tried to avoid originally?
Originally, yeah. It's not that I hadn't written the stuff. I just didn't know that anyone would want to hear about, similar kinds of traumas, families breaking apart, parents dying or completely off the rails, and siblings,
Well, here's a question
Fun
for
stuff.
all of us is,
Yeah.
what about you, what about the reaction of your actual family?
Well, that's assuming they're all literate, or haven't already been burned enough times that they know better than to read it. Years ago, I had a student, freshman, who I left into like a senior writing class, and they were all very protective of her and encouraging. And she wrote a slightly vulgar piece that was really funny. And it was published in the student magazine, and she was so proud that I came to my house and said, I sent it to my grandparents, I think they'll be so proud of me. And I was like, oh no, you're so going to regret this. So like they were going to cut her off and not let her go to college because they were paying for it. I don't expect family to necessarily welcome any portraits of themselves, although I think I've gone out of my way to be as fair and generous and kind as I possibly can. And you're both doing this in your way, in your own ways. Is this difficult for you? Talking about your mom?
I was more thinking about Dee's because my mom's not in my life, but like all of that family you're writing about is in your life, and it sounds like you guys have been through a lot together, and you're actually tight enough to care.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
It was tough with Mom.
Really?
Yeah. She had to talk about, as a kid, you grow up, you know stuff is happening, right? Your parents are fighting, whatever. Like, I knew he had girlfriends and stuff, but I didn't know. She said, like, do you really want me to get into that? And I said, I kind of need you to.
So you had her narrate all of those affairs, and so she had to go through that.
Yes.
Was it cathartic or was it the opposite?
Both.
Yeah.
Horrible and cathartic at the same time. She felt good about getting it out because she knew there was stuff that I didn't know, because a lot of it happened, I was like, just started to walk, and he ran off with somebody and stayed away for like 5 months and sent her no money, and and then came back and was angry that she didn't have dinner ready or whatever.
Cool. So just basic love
Yeah,
stuff.
stuff like that.
Patriarchy doesn't exist.
Right. But I was too young to know a lot of that. That's not she feels embarrassed that it's out there because she feels like I put up with this guy.
Oh no! So it's like, of course, it's her fault.
For
as
24
the victim
years,
of it.
she stayed with him, and all of that. But she also feels good that somebody knows, because when she finally divorced him, the whole family blamed her, of course, because she tried to get rid of him, because they were like, Bruce is great, he's a great guy, and all that. So
I feel like I'm familiar with that narrative. That is an impossible situation. I think that happens a lot with family who, when they're the victims of a situation, it's like the worst thing for them, that people would feel sorry for them or misinterpret them as weak, or
Right.
like having to put up with something, rather than, oh my God, you were so strong that you survived this, and let me just honor that so that other people that read it also feel kinship with you, because her story is unfortunately like so not unique,
right,
even to
Yeah.
this day.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
That's really.
Luckily, she comes
poignant.
off that way in the book, like strong. She was there every day, and my dad was not there every day. So
Yeah.
you got to give credit to the person who's there every day.
Yeah.
So, and she gets full credit for all of that.
Yeah. That makes sense. Do you know what I noticed also with your work and just all the shit show we're having with global warming? Have you guys, when you were writing your books or when you were done writing your books, did people talk to you a lot about the American landscape and writing about it and watching it go up in flames at the same time?
I write about it directly.
Yeah.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, and it's pretty much on my mind in everything I'm writing now. How to account for what's happening, be a witness to it, but also to find a language, a conceptual language anyway, that people will listen to, and will be willing to do maybe what is impossible, which is change.
Well, one of the interesting things is to watch one piece of dirt years after year after year after year and watch it change. And that's the great, wonderful gift our dad gave us, because now we've had this piece of property for 30 years and we'll have it for a long time later. My brother Brett said, you know, he doesn't have any kids, and he said, this is our legacy. Like, we're gonna watch this place change, and we're already seeing, you know, we have a tupelo tree, which is from way in the south, and we're both standing there going, we have a tupelo tree. You know why? Because they're all migrating north.
Yeah.
And you know, and certain things are showing up. Wolves are coming down, and other things are going north. Like, we're watching the landscape change by just watching one spot year after year after year, which is interesting.
Yeah. But having written about it in this time, you guys are sort of archiving that American landscape in this way, where it's fossilizing it, right? Like, so through your own narrative, and then as it changes, there is at least this evidence of it having been this particular way, because it's not going to be that particular way.
That's correct.
Soon enough.
Yeah.
I think also learning, like I said, about trying to see as much time in a moment as possible is a necessary part of that kind of discussion of global warming. When you look at a landscape, can you actually see what's been here, who has been here, what is still present, what has changed, and certainly any landscape that has been recently glaciated, that is in the last 15,000 years, and Leningrad, for example. I mean, it really, in the scheme of things, not so long ago, was under ice, and people maybe were at the edge of it. And certainly that is as true of that place as this place we are right now, which would have been in much the same, had a very similar climate.
It's true. I don't know what time it is, if we should open up for questions.
Yeah, we have plenty of time for questions if you want to.
Okay, great.
Questions?
One sort of thing I was thinking about as one of you was speaking, sorry, I don't remember his name, but it was, Sophia was talking about the Leningrad in the United States. And it was making me think about, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the work of Peter Hessler, but he wrote about China, did the letter from China in the New Yorker. And I was influenced by him when I was younger. And one of his books is called Oracle Bones, and he kind of draws out this connection where part of what's going on now in China is connected to with the Cultural Revolution and everything, as people are kind of cut off from their past or their history. And I was kind of thinking that might illuminate in different ways the things that you guys were talking about. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. Sort of. But I was kind of hoping you guys could maybe riff on that.
Your work seems directly related to that, like sort of being cut off distinctly from a past at like a specific day, like you left.
Yeah, but also the vilification, like in with China and that piece that you're talking about too. There's also like this vilification of some of the things that have happened in the past and distilling them to this. Like, it just becomes very reductive, right? Like, I think what we think about of the Soviet Union versus like this new Putin Russia, they're all so shallow, and so in that there is a death. And so for me, in a way, I'm like, I didn't want to write a book necessarily about the Soviet Union, but I was hoping through like the tone that their narrator, the whoever is in there, sort of gets to eulogize some aspect of the Soviet Union that feels so personal that you can't just kind of throw it out and say like, oh, all it is like these kitschy things that America sort of reinvented. You know, now we know, for example, that the CIA got Dr. Zhivago published in Russian and then sent back to the Soviet Union to infiltrate us. I mean, there's just the work that the Americans have done to destroy my fucking country. I mean, instead of, I mean, it would have been fantastic if we would have stayed with Carter, and if Carter could have helped us become a socialist democracy like Gorbachev wanted to, and I know these things, who cares? Nobody cares about these things. But I do. I really think we were a country that was on its way to progress, that was on its way to civility. Perestroika was a thing. Cooperatives that we were opening up. Like, I don't talk about this much, but my father he became a hypnotist, and then eventually he started running his own, business in our house, which was like, unheard of. Like, who could do that? People started to the thaw was really happening, and the Americans were so frightened by that they really did every single thing in their power to destroy that country. And they did use the Jews and the whole movement of Save the Jews to further that. They call it, Americans call it the most successful protest in this country, actually, that was staged.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
so it's kind of, to me, it's scary because we wouldn't have Putin today, we wouldn't have Trump today, we wouldn't have any of these things today if the Reagan era and the Bush era.
If our good intentions hadn't succeeded.
It was malicious. But anyway, so that's to answer your question. I don't know if that does.
But another aspect of Jewish experience, my family came here before the Holocaust, I think about 1912. But silence. We weren't from anywhere. We were from this little junkyard in Ohio, and that was the extent of it. And returning to Lithuania about 8 years ago, 10 years ago it was interesting because what memory I had, I didn't know. In fact, even the village, the shtetl they were from, until my grandmother was dying, and then she just sort of blurted it out through her aphasia. She said the name, and it's spelled a number of ways, but it said angst, which seemed like a perfect name for where we were from. But going there was very sobering. And I've written quite a bit about, in a way, how my grandfather kind of reinvented in his business a small universe that sort of reflected a medieval world that he grew up in, that you'd see in the cellars of Vilnius.
Wow.
But that I had no other, obviously I'm imagining a lot of this, but that sense of being cut off by silence by the older generation, who, so where are we from? They just go, Russia, So it's like, okay. But then it turns out it's not really Russia. It was a changing border and beyond the pale, but they would say no more. And so
the trauma is so heavy. It's like
there's
the less
nothing.
you say.
Yeah.
I'm deeply fascinated by this idea that, as like the guy in the canyon, like the absence is there, and those people in that place, and that idea of where you come from never goes away.
Yeah.
And you carry it with you, and you care about it, but I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I care about it. I wasn't from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Our family was Dutch, right? My name is very Dutch. And they came all as a church in the 1840s. They felt there was a church that broke away from the Dutch Reformed Church and came to Michigan and founded Holland, Michigan. So my family's all from, all the towns there are like Holland, Zeeland, Drenthe, Overijssel, Noordeloos. They're all Dutch towns in Michigan. Mm-hmm. So it never went away. Mm-hmm. Like, we didn't live as Americans, we lived as Dutch people, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. which is completely different. There's a windmill in town, and all. Like, they tried to make it just like over there. And I just took my mom back like 2 weeks ago for the first time to go, and it was exactly like Michigan, the north part of the Netherlands, in Groningen. We went to the little church where the person immigrated from, and there was a windmill about it, and my mom was like, "Huh, well, it's so different. It's not what I thought it would be." I was like, "What do you mean it's exactly the same?"
It's like a little bit of denial.
But she wanted to go her whole life back there to see, like, that drive is so deep.
Right.
She needed to go back and see the book where my great-great-great-great-great-grandpa Martinez's name, his baptism is written in the book and all.
Yeah.
And then,
The human salmon.
Exactly, yeah, the human sampling. And then a guy showed up at the church who's like her cousin fourth removed or something, and said, "Oh, do you want to see the house where your name was born?" And he said, "It's in Sachsenhausen, it's the next town over," and Napoleon declared that everyone had to have a family name in 1803, and they lived in the new house. So they became Neinhuis, which is the new house. That's her maiden name. And we had no idea that even existed, and he said, "Yeah, they still live there." And so we went and saw it, and it was like so like the salmon. Like she went right to ground zero, like basically where she was born. And it meant something. I'm not sure what yet.
Right. Well, we'll
I'm
be
trying
there
to
after
wrestle.
we die, right?
Yeah,
So
I'm wrestling
we
with
wanna
that now.
honor
I
it.
want to write about it, and I was like, what does that mean? Like, why do we want to go there?
As you've already indicated, writing about family in the genre of memoir is complicated. What draws you personally to want to take that on, and why does it matter that we tell our stories?
You're up.
Well, I mean, maybe it doesn't matter, but I think it's important who speaks, right? Like, there's like what you were saying about your mom, for example. If you weren't there to ask her those questions and to sort of make her into a character, then she dies away, and she dies with those stories, and we keep pretending that these things aren't happening, then we will repeat mistakes, right? Like, we're meant to sort of like try to remaster old trauma and stage it different, or we want to tell ourselves that. But I think in doing that, like, I think human beings just want to get it right. And so we want justice and truth and poetry. And so without the writing, it doesn't seem possible. Like I know everybody's like, oh God, I'm feeling this way. What's that one poem that reminds me of how I'm feeling? Like, we really need that. But who gets to tell those stories is important. So for many, many years, it was certain people. They were white and wealthy and mostly male. And so we're kind of also changing that tide. So I think it's extremely important. Memoir or not, because fiction is memoir too.
Good point.
So I wanted to ask you, is it Sophia? Is that right?
Sophia.
Sophia. So do you have, now you live in the United States, and do you consider yourself American and Jewish and Russian? And do you have feelings of place about Portland or where you live in the United States that are similar to the strong feeling of place you have about Leningrad?
Yeah, I'm deeply American, so American. And I think that has to do a lot with like American feminism, especially like Black feminists, lesbian feminists, people like Eileen Miles, especially when I was in high school. Thank God that people in Sonic Youth, I was like, following Sonic Youth, and Sonic Youth isn't Eileen Miles. And if you lived in New York City,
right,
you can see there would be like posters like, Eileen Miles is doing a workshop, and and I'd be like, whoever this is, once I read her at the time, I knew after reading that I am an American, whatever that is, I'm that. And in terms of my Jewishness, I mean, I earned it like really, really heavily. So, but I'm not a religious person that way, and I think religion is a little bit scary. But we do the traditions, and we kind of keep those stories alive, as we were talking about earlier. Why does it matter? Just to sort of like know where we came from. But yeah, deeply American, and into Portland, even though it could be a seedy place.
Yeah. Yes.
Anybody else?
What does deeply American mean?
Oh God. There's two other people. They're
This is the point I'm
Americans.
going to take is.
Oh, right.
I know.
I'm.
Sitting in the presence of this art, what does that mean?
Yeah, I just mean like
Okay.
I'm an immigrant, and I don't know enough about. I don't know enough about any place to be anywhere, but at this stage in my life, the America that like welcomed me or didn't welcome me or hurt me or didn't hurt me, like it's the only home I know. And so I have to take care of it, and I have to, instead of saying like, fuck this place, I'm moving, or this place is on fire, I could do better, that I'm going to stay here and learn as much about it as possible and be in communion with the humans that live here and the humans that were sacrificed so that the white people could take over this place too, and honor that history and culture also. Just to learn about America more, because it's my home and I'm not going to go be anywhere else.
We're all.
I love the stories that you tell, but kind of the flippant comment I make is, you have Russia as the old country, and Dean, let's bring the Netherlands here, and we can go back to the old country, and you can go back to the old village. If I want to go to the old country, it's Great Falls.
Right.
And it's nothing like what it was to my generation, even
Right.
4 generations back.
I was struck by this recent trip, Chris, that we are all still totally immigrants. And that, like, even going back there, I was like, oh, we're from this town. And then a cousin shows up and said, no, you're from that town. And those people are like, no, we came from the north of Germany and then from Scandinavia. Like, it doesn't end. Like, that is, it's very, very difficult to figure out where that is. But, like, one of the things I wanted to do with this book was I found out that we cared about a place and dug in on that place, and that place got into our minds and changed our family. And so now for me, that's what matters, is that place matters to me and my family. So I have to know everything I can about this actual place. And because the roots, that's why I was questioning what does that mean, because the roots just keep going. Like, we didn't have a root, as far as I know. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, just to follow up with what everybody's already saying, because I feel like I kind of opened the can of worms, and it was maybe not totally intentional, but that, to my mind, when I was asking a question about being cut off from places, one of the things that I would say, I'm also, just like the 3 people up on the panel, somebody who would consider myself an American and somebody who has immigrant ancestry only, as far as I know. And for me personally, when I think about what I'm doing right now, a lot of what I need to be thinking about is just the fact that the United States is also a place where people are cut off from history. And it's not always something that we're even totally keyed into. So
Totally.
I appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Oh, should we end it?
Yeah.
Thank you so
We have
much for that.
2 more here, so.
Yeah, I'm curious if there was any level of disappointment after the books were finished as to the amount of calm or catharsis that took place.
Or just fear of bad writing.
Oh, fear of editors.
No, it's a relief to be able to move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And to build upon it. And that's, I look forward to that moment, because creating something is, in some ways, a lot more pleasurable than revising it. Although, I mean, maybe that's a little too restrictive, but but it's always, I always am happy when suddenly I can feel a little more space around me, and things can happen as they wish to.
Because sometimes it takes a long time. Like, this book took me 5 years, and after my poor wife read the 45th draft or something, she was like, please, is this thing gonna ever end? And then you suddenly feel like, okay, I got it. And then you can just let it go, because it was pretty clear I wasn't gonna let it go until it got it.
And
right,
some of the stories, like listening to Sophia talk about her background, it's, you're getting some trauma down on paper, you're getting harsh memories down on paper. So I just was curious whether it was like...
Well, the stakes have to be high if you're going to be a writer, I think, or make art, or, if you're going to do something that matters, the stakes have to be high, or else it's pointless. Anyways, on that note.
Nobody else will care about it unless the stakes are high.
Yeah, starting with yourself.
Yeah. Sorry, there's one more.
I was wondering, when you're writing about your life or a specific relationship or event, there's so many years worth of material, and I'm wondering kind of how you started to winnow that down into a book.
In my case, I really did just kind of start pulling thread, and sometimes it was, I had the years off, something happened with this year, with my brothers and my mom and everybody else I had to do a lot of research. I had to go back to a lot of sources and talk to people who knew my dad and other stuff just to narrow it down. It was not easy. Same for you?
I had just had to create like my own containers or I don't know, constraints, I guess. So in doing that helped me sort of hone it in. Like I was really obsessive about the number 4, so then certain things would fit into that or not fit into it, and then I would just really just stack it on my obsessions. And if I wasn't obsessed with a thing, that it didn't make it in.
Once you start pulling from memory, though, like I would wake up in the morning and go, oh yeah, that other thing that happened. And sometimes they were big, like huge turning points in the book and stuff that I didn't remember until I started actually pulling all that stuff out.
Well, I guess I would just answer that by answering another question you asked about why tell stories. And those stories are world-making in one very important sense. And sometimes they're smaller worlds than others, but it's certainly it's a way of trying to hold things together that are always wanting to fly apart, and I think the people and the places I write about are people and places I don't want to be forgotten. I want them to at least live in words, so that not so much that people will read my work and say, oh, well, I know what's here, but rather that they learn to look and see what's present in the stories that are present, listen to them, because we're not just passing through. We have some obligation to each other, and I think that's very much what motivated me here.
Good to end on a note of wisdom.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for being here.